I am the newly elected state chairman of the Montana Young Republicans.
We are here to let it be known that we are the pro-life generation.
Do the right thing and give the people of Montana congressional representation.
The right to vote is probably one of the most important, given as we are a constitutional republic.
And I thank God for the individuals who fought for my rights before I was ever born.
The Second Amendment clearly states the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I'm standing up for the fundamental rights of young adults across this country, across Montana, and I urge a yes vote.
We are Montana Young Republicans.
Hello, Montana. This is Rivera, your chairman for the Young Republicans in Montana. And I'm happy to be here with Representative Skees, who is part of the Montana legislature. And we're here today to talk about the Redistricting Committee, about the congressional maps that are being proposed actually this next week. And we're gonna just basically have a conversation about that, why it's important. And we want to implore the public to really pay attention to what's happening, because this will affect everyone one way or another. So welcome, Representative Skees. Good to have you here.
Thank you, Chairman. It's awesome to be a guest, and look forward to talking to you about some of the most important subjects for us, at least in the next decade.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, we've, Representative Skees and I and a number of others have been heavily involved in the recent public hearings and work sessions where commissioners from both sides of the aisle, from Republicans, Democrats, have been battling it out on what is the criteria behind the maps and how these lines should be drawn. And obviously, you know, Representative Skees, you and I have been out there and really giving it to them as far as the commission, and, you know, really just kind of pointing out the issues. And I guess one of the biggest issues is, has been, I guess you can give me the refresher here, Representative Skees, is how the Democrat side of this commission is proposing maps that are considered not to be in line with the Constitution. Do you want to just go ahead and start with that and tell us, are they in line with the Constitution? What's going on? What's happening there?
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. And you've been right there with me on the front line, man. And I really do appreciate all of your efforts, and the Young Republicans. All those folks we're constantly meeting behind the scenes and talking about the things that we're talking about and trying to keep them involved. And I'm just so excited that they're involved. The Constitution, it's Article 5, Section 14, which, by the way, as you well know, how Commissioner Lamson constantly says they're immune to the legislature putting their foot on this. Did you notice what section that is in the Montana Constitution? The legislative section. So anyhow, it basically, the district should be built just on populations. That's what the Constitution says. Compact and contiguous. And so the definition of compact means its length and width can't be greater than each other. So the ideal district is really a circle, but you can't do a circle with the hard edges we have on a map. And so the ideal compactness is it's easier for a person to maneuver around. It keeps all commonalities together. So like for us, we live up in the Flathead. A great example would be the Flathead Valley is a community of interest. The cities of Whitefish, Columbia Falls, and Kalispell, and the little suburb areas like Big Fork and Lakeside and Summers and Marion, we all are kind of interlinked. The airport's right there north of Kalispell. It's a huge tourist industry. It's also a huge timber industry. We have mills up here. And so we're all linked with commonalities. And so to take and draw a map that splits Flathead in half is ridiculous. It doesn't serve anybody in the Flathead. And so if it's just based on population, you have to question why. So what's that? So if you look at it historically, the Montana legislature, since the Constitution began in 72, there are many parts of the redistricting language in that section 14 that aren't included. So we pass laws describing what you're supposed to do with that. Like, and I hammer this you and I are kind of laughing about this a few minutes ago, but I hammered this repeatedly to these guys. They changed the chairs, right? And so how do you change the chairs on a redistricting commission that's already met for 2 years? Well, guess what? The legislature decided that. We set it up. The vacancy on the commission is 5-1-103. And that's exactly what they did to replace the chair with another person. It's not in the Constitution, but they went to 5-1-103. They're asking state agencies to provide information. That's 5-1-107. They're doing public hearings. That's not in the Constitution. That's in 5-1-108. And so the legislature has a long history of making sure that these districts are drawn properly. So the big one is 5-1-115. And when you look at that, it further hammers home the point in the Constitution that the district has to be based on population. And so, when these guys get together and they set up these districts, they set up what they call mandatory and discretionary criteria. And that's the things they have to look at when they're designing these maps. And so the district, if you look at in the law, Montana law 5-1-115 sub 3, a district may not be drawn for the purposes of favoring a political party, period. The political affiliations of registered voters, period. Partisan voter lists, period. And so you're not supposed to base these districts on anything besides compact, contiguous, equal populations, and keeping communities of interest and political boundaries together. And so the Democrats introduced this thing this last cycle called competitiveness. And of course, that can mean so many different things to so many people. For me, as a conservative Republican who likes to play fair, competitive to me means you're looking at political outcomes and trying to make both districts easily won by either party. You know what I mean? They're both about equally weighted. That's what competitive means to me. But once we've seen the maps that they've presented and hearing testimony in the committee, what competitive really means to the Democrats is one that they can win for sure. Now, their problem is a good chunk of Montana is conservative and Republican. This is just shown in the last decade, the majorities we've had in the House and Senate. Currently, we have 68 in the House. That's the majority in the House. Or I'm sorry, 67. 68 was when I was a freshman back in 11. So the state is solid red in a lot of areas. So the Democrats are having to get real crafty to design maps to create a district that's competitive, which of course is code for one that we can win. And that's what's wrong with our Constitution, with this and interpreting this with our Constitution.
So, participating in these commission meetings, you mentioned Commissioner Lampton, who is on the Democrat side, along with Commissioner Miller, and sometimes I'm flabbergasted because they keep on pushing the idea that they're an independent commission, that they are separate from the legislator, they're independent. However, their funding comes from the legislator. They're funding what they need to do, how they preside over their meetings, how they choose, as you said, how they choose their commissioners, all come from what's annotated on the Montana law and how they should conduct themselves. So,
and plus, don't forget, everybody on that commission is picked by legislators. On the Republican side, the majority leader, Brad Cheetah, of the previous cycle, he picked Dan Stusek. The Senate majority leader, he picked Jeff Essman. And so Lamson and Miller were picked by Democrat-controlled the caucuses in the House and the Senate. So they can't even act like this is independent.
Well, exactly. So not only do we have representation based on party, because they're not representing all Montana in a sense, because they're really representing two political powers. That's what's happening. And then you have a supposed independent commissioner it was chosen by the Supreme Court because we couldn't agree on anyone that would be truly independent. So I guess kind of going into that, it's like they're not an independent organization, but they are suggesting that they are, and that they don't have to abide by the Constitution. And for me, I don't know any Montana that could just pick or choose what laws they can follow.
I agree. And Commissioner Lamson literally said it in a meeting, I think 4 meetings ago. He's above the law because they're an independent commission. And he keeps saying phrases like the Supreme Court has long held the independence of this commission. No, district court has, not the Supreme Court, if you do the research. And then the bottom line is this, like you just said, 5-1-115, all 4 parts are currently in law. They're not under lawsuit. They're not pending interpretation by any court. They are current law on the books. And Lamson and Miller, both those commissioners, have decided that they're just going to ignore this. As a matter of fact, the Representative Mafi Funk got in the meeting and praised them for ignoring House Bill 506, which expanded the laws and the rules on 5-1-115, specifically that sub 4. Now she's in charge of the DNC. It's crazy. You know what I mean? It's all smoke and mirrors to begin to make us think that this thing is anything independent. Last thing, Dennison, you and I both know, all you got to do is look at the last 30 years. Lamson specifically, that commissioner has been on this commission for 30 years. And every single cycle, the maps get tighter and tighter and tighter to create more and more Democrat victories. It's totally skewed. It is totally partisan. It's ridiculous to assert it as anything else when you just look at the history. And then look what's just happened. We just got 5 maps from the Democrats. What a joke. All 5 maps are some of the most partisan, hacked up pieces of garbage I've ever seen this commission come up with.
Well, that's exactly what I want to go into, because when you hear that, they are objecting to following the law, which is 5-1-115, which talks about the particular definition of compactness and contentions, the limiting crossing political boundary lines, which is prohibiting the use of political and election data, and prohibiting drawing districts for the purpose of favoring or disfavoring a party, right? So,
Yeah.
It's like you're objecting to that. Why? They voted for compactness. They voted for it, and when it came to the mandatory criteria, right? They keep on saying that they want to take politics outside of the whole process, but they're asking for it when it comes to the political and election data and drawing maps to make sure that it's favoring one side, which is their side, and disfavoring the other side, which is the Republican side. And that's what leads me to the whole confusion of competitiveness, because since you mentioned that, I heard a lot of testimonies coming from, they don't say they're Democrats, they don't say they're on the liberal side, but you have different representatives from different organizations that come to these commissions, and they say, well, we have to take politics outside this commission of drawing lines, which is why we're pushing for competitiveness in the districts. This has to be fair. And that all sounds dandy, right? That all sounds like, oh yeah, let's take politics out and make sure it's fair. But how do you make sure it's fair? Well, you make sure it's fair. What they're saying is by looking at political data and seeing who voted Democrat, who's voting Republican, and what about the Libertarians, and what about the Green Party, what about the Independents voters? They don't matter apparently.
Yeah, not even included.
Not even included. It's just a Republican and Democrat battle that they're making into in the name of fairness, and really it's just a ruse. And it makes it, and it's really sad, because I don't believe that those who are coming, giving public testimony really understand that. I think they've fallen for the narrative that the Democrat commissioners have put out there, but I don't really believe they know what they're talking about. It's really huge confusion.
And it's total hypocrisy. Total hypocrisy. You just nailed it. How can you say we have to make competitive districts, and in the same face say that we need to make fair districts? That you can't determine one without cheating the other. And then remember, Dennis, and you were there 5 and 6 meetings ago, back in May and June. Remember the tune of the Democrat commissioners when they were accepting the rules on how to draw this. They wanted to go to 5% deviation in population. And their excuse was they wanted more flexibility when designing these districts. What a joke. And thank goodness that the Supreme Court, SCOTUS, came out with a ruling saying it had to be less than 1%, 0.75 being the highest deviation. And boy, Commissioners Lamson and Miller definitely changed their tune then and came back and said, well, no, yeah, I guess we'll go to that. Whereas just previous 3 meetings, they were like, no, it's got to be 5%. We're only going to accept 5%. So they're putting their foot on the scale repeatedly, have done in the past for 20 years, creating districts that Democrats can win.
Well, exactly. And the other point, I guess, to your point, is that just with the idea that the Constitution itself says that has to be close as possible, and yet they are recommending 5%. That doesn't make any sense. Like, how can you acknowledge the Constitution knowing that you're supposed to be as close as possible, which is at least, what would say, under 1% at least, yep. Right? And then suggest we should be at the federal level, supposed federal level at the time, 5%. And thank God that's changed. But I mean, again, and then they end up voting for it anyway, which is the whole hypocrisy behind that whole idea. But I think I want to really, go back into, the idea of competitiveness, and something I've said in my previous testimonies has been that redistricting is like election in reverse. It's usually the voters who get to pick the politicians. That's the whole point of the vote, right? For those who are listening. However, in redistricting, it's the politicians who are picking the voters. And it shouldn't be that way. And that's what's happening right now. And that's what we call gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is the idea is that we're drawing lines to favor or disfavor a political party, right? I know there's a lot of Democrats who probably be watching this and saying, hey, you know, Republicans gerrymander all the time and you guys do this or that. And say what you want about, I don't know, by any other Republicans, but here in Montana, we want a fair map. We want things not to be gerrymandered. We want things, and again, we want things to be fair. What I mean by fairness, because that itself could be a subjective term. What I mean is that we don't look at someone's political affiliations, but we look at the population and keeping communities intact. We don't want to pick the voters. We don't want to say, hey, I prefer to have this area and I want to draw in this particular way so I can have this particular outcome. No, I want to have it where it's based on this community, and the community gets to decide whether it's majority this, majority that, doesn't matter. You know, for example, if I were to draw up now, it's known here in Helena, where I live, in Helena, Montana, that the downtown area or the city is mostly liberal. Who am I to go in there and say, well, you have to make it competitive. So you have to bring in Republican votes in there so it could be competitive and so they can equal out. And that doesn't make sense. That means I'm picking voters and placing them there from a different area and trying to say, hey, let's make it competitive. And that's not right. If downtown is mostly Democrat and they want a Democrat leader that represents their values, then so be it. That's the idea behind it. But don't cut out other communities and make it seem like, oh, we're being fair. No, that's not being fair at all. What you're doing is trying to ensure an outcome. And that's wrong. That's just really wrong.
If they really wanted to be fair, the ideal district, remember, we had a second congressional seat from 1910 to 1990. And during that time, the split was east-west with a line drawn north and south that roughly followed the Continental Divide. So let's look at today's district. If you want to be fair and honest and have it be totally population-based, it should be west and east. I don't think anybody in Montana disagrees with that. That way, both districts border Canada because that's such a huge economic driver for the state. So both representatives have part of that interface. There's Glacier Park in the northwest, and there's Yellowstone down in the south, in the center south. Gallatin and Yellowstone are the two fastest growing counties in the state. Missoula and Flathead are right there with them. So 2 and 2, they're broke it down. Gallatin and Yellowstone, they're all based on the tourism that's coming out of that park, plus their own ag industries east of the Continental Divide. Everything west of the Continental Divide is almost all timber and tourism as well. And so there's commonalities that are just so simple. That's the way this map should be broken up. It should be right down along that line. Now, the tribes came out with a great idea to make it come up around maybe Cascade and catch part of the Blackfeet, so the Blackfeet can be with the CSKT. So we have 2 tribes in the west and then 5 tribes in the east. That's a great idea because you can catch that population and make that work and keep Gallatin in the east. These are fair maps, and not once in the discussion of those maps did you and I say, "Well, wow, there's a lot of Democrats in Gallatin. Should we put them with Butte and Helena and Missoula so we can make a super district?" None of that was discussed. What we just did is a simple little look. That's the way the map should be, based on just what's fair for the population and what's historical and communities of interest.
Well, yeah, speaking of community of interest, I'm sure a lot of people don't understand what we're talking about. I will have displayed here the maps for people who can see, but Democrats are pushing for the Southwestern C map. And I guess I'll just divulge this to public. When I originally talked to Commissioner Lamson one-on-one back in July, or it was June or July, one of the first meetings, and I mentioned, one of my contentions was, you guys are trying to push the C map, which is gerrymandering. And he goes, no, that's a Republican ploy. Republicans made that up. And then fast forward, here we are today, and 4 of those maps of the 5 maps they proposed was this C map exactly. It's like, what? Yeah. It's like, well, I mean, if you're not playing a politician, what are you doing? I mean, that's a typical, I don't know what, I don't have the words for it. I don't have any appropriate words, at least at the moment, for that. But I mean, obviously, it's not being truthful. And so talking about communities, as you just mentioned, you talk about this east-west map and why that's important. But it's about really keeping those communities together. Obviously, there's a difference between, West Montana and East Montana. In fact, I'm about to go travel to East Montana because we're so different in between the 2 regions. And so that's what it's about. It's not about a Republican outcome or a Democrat outcome, right? Of course, Republicans is in our interest to make sure that, Democrats don't take advantage of us, or do anything illegal. I mean, of course, I think that would goes the same goes for Democrats against Republicans. You want to keep us in check. However, the idea that we had to be after communities and making sure those community interests are together, just the same way that you were pointing out. And so that's why we're pushing for an east-west map. And I guess, I want to touch. Go ahead.
Let me just throw in on that one too. The sad thing is, there's bigger majorities of Republicans in Montana. You just look at the way things. I mean, look at Tester. He's never won with more than 48%. He wins with the independent on the ballot. If there was a you have to win by 50% plus one vote, Tester would not be our senator.
Right.
And so it's just that simple. And so where Republicans engage in this struggle is in the policy debates. Our policies are superior to theirs in light of the average Montana citizen, because the election results give us solid, powerful majorities. Democrat ideologies are not generally accepted by the majority of Montanans. And so for them to stay in power or create a situation where it's fair or they're competitive with us, they have to cheat the system to create a map to allow that.
Well,
That's
it's more than just
difference.
It's more than just cheating the system. What you're doing is you're taking away the votes of others.
Yes.
That's really what it did. It diminishes the vote. It doesn't matter if they happen to be Republican. It diminishes that individual's vote and who they want to be represented. For example, in the legislative districts, right? East Helena, here in Helena, is connected all the way downtown. And yet we have had a Democrat representative for the longest time. East Helena is mostly conservative. And yet they have a representative that doesn't really truly represent their values. So how is that fair? What happened to their votes?
Totally. Lamson did the same thing down in Seeley Lake. I have friends in Seeley Lake for a decade or more. That district was all the way down the Swan, all the way over, and it catches a little tiny chunk of Missoula down in the southwest corner. Just enough to put the foot on the scale that is always won by a Democrat. The Democrat who's in that seat never goes to Seeley Lake, never drives to Condon, never even gets on that road because they don't need those votes to get elected. And so it's basically a pie coming out of the center of Missoula. That's why I jokingly call Joe Lamson the king of the amoeba districts.
Well, I think he's the king of gerrymandering, but
Amen.
I think he has several names there.
Well,
but
luckily, his congressional maps just reinforce that to all the new generation of folks. These are pathetic.
Well, it's even interesting that in the end of the day, Commissioner Miller, she always pushes for the fact like, well, of course, how are we going to ensure it's fair if we don't look at someone's political affiliation? And she kind of has this attitude of just saying like, well, of course, that's what we have to do. I mean, duh. And I was like,
yeah, of course.
Do you not understand what you're saying?
Yeah, of course, we have to break the law. Oh, no, we don't have to listen to that law.
Yeah, just ignore that. Let's put that under the rug,
Yeah, we're so powerful that we can pick and choose. On this commission, we're independents. We can pick and choose what laws we want to go with.
And what average Montanan can do that?
Yeah, none of us.
Yeah,
it was funny. I wanted to have a conversation with Commissioner Miller and say, so let's see you go down Highway 2 and let's see you go 90 miles an hour. And you get pulled over by the highway patrol and he comes to your door and wants your driver's license and registration. And you tell him, I know I'm speeding, but that was a bill passed with Republicans. It was a partisan bill. So I don't have to follow that bill. Do you think she's going to get a ticket for going 90? Yes.
Exactly. I mean, us Montanan citizens don't have the luxury or the privilege that the Democrats love using that word to be able to choose and what laws we could abide by, and I think one thing that we have to touch on is the fact that in the end of the day, they talk about how competitiveness it would make voter turnout better because it was like, oh, my vote counts, so there will most likely be more voters, right? Because it's supposedly competitive, right? Mm-hmm. And then you go on to say, and it will make candidates work harder. And And again, on the surface, that sounds like a grand idea. But the reality of it, and me living that reality, because I was a former candidate for HD 79, and the reality is like, look, I have this huge area I call HD 79 that goes all the way towards the area of Missoula that goes into the city, right? Into the city of Helena. There's like 3 different communities there, at least. The completely different aspects of what they want. And yet I'm supposed to tackle as a candidate this whole area. Like, it almost seems impossible. And it's a huge area, and it's a lot of work. But in the end of the day, it's like, okay, well, how am I going to represent one community when you're not representing only a community? It's not making the candidate working harder. What you're ending up doing is you're having them look for the majority within that district and cater to that majority. And it doesn't work. I mean, fortunately, in my district, which has long been held by a Democrat for years, at least for the last 10 years, we had no data. I was the first Republican to go for that area, and I proved that was purple. But I'm sure if the map was drawn correctly, I would have won that district because
right.
the precincts that voted for me voted overwhelmingly the majority for my message. However, the inner city, even though I did get some votes from there as well,
which has more people, by the way,
went for the Democrat. I lost by 10%, which is only, let's say, a difference of 700 votes. I could have gotten another 400 votes, and I would have won the seat. I mean, it shows that if you work hard, despite what kind of map is drawn, you can win over a seat. However, right, the odds are stacked against you if you make it supposedly competitive. It doesn't work.
It doesn't. And the sad truth is, look at those downtown Helena districts where the Democrats are just huge favored to win. Those folks hardly work at all. Do they go knock doors? Do they spend thousands on mailers? Do they spend thousands on signs? Do they go to every single community function so they can have the best opportunity to meet as many voters as possible? No, they take it for granted they're going to win. Just like the folks in Missoula and Butte. They take their voters for granted. So these districts where they say it's more competitive, they actually create lazier representatives. They don't work hard. And worse, if you work hard, if you've got to actually work hard to get the votes in your district, you're going to reach out to your district. At the transmittal break, you go home and you have 2 or 3 town halls. How many Helena reps that are Democrats, I would ask, actually had a town hall during transmittal?
They never meet them. That's the crazy thing about it. They never meet them.
It's because they bank on the vote blue no matter who. So it's pathetic.
In the district I was running in, my signs were everywhere. I mean, you couldn't get into town. I mean, you're coming visiting from Missoula, all you see my signs. Rivera here, Rivera there, everywhere, right? There wasn't one sign for my opponent. I mean, probably three or so inside the community somewhere, but barely any signs. And he wasn't out knocking doors, had no volunteers. I really don't know what he spent money on. I don't even know what to say. I just like
he got voted because there was a D in parentheses after his name. Period.
Exactly. And that's how he carried the vote in the end. And it's really,
that's the way the seat was drawn by Joe Lamson 10 years ago.
Exactly. So how is that fair? How's that fair for me as a new candidate, my first time running? And if it didn't make it competitive. All it did is just put the odds against me. But despite all those things that happened here in Helena, our Republican candidates were all first-time candidates. We carried it to make it purple. Basically, we barely lost by 10%, and they didn't know that. So obviously, even if we drew to community, let's say it's the city, right? The city of Helena, which is, we know that's majority liberal or Democrat. We come in with the right message. Doesn't matter who you are, whether you're independent or Republican. Right. It should be about your message, not about your political affiliation. It always should be about the person, not the party. It shouldn't be the D or the R. It should be about what's that person's message, and do you want that person to represent you despite their party? And that's what I think it should be about.
Amen. Now remember, after seeing maps like this, We're pretty sure that the word competitive to the Democrats means districts we can win.
Exactly.
So
They're just saying
it's just like racist today when it's uttered by a Democrat. It just means a conservative winning the argument. It's the same exact thing. We have to understand the lexicon of what they're saying so that we can make a reference to what they're saying.
Well, you would think the Democrat Party would be more concerned about natives, and they apparently they're not, and so that's really sad because their communities should be kept together, and especially as you mentioned in the north, what was it, the northern tribes? They mentioned the Blackfeet and what's the other tribe you mentioned?
CSKT.
See, okay, and keeping them together instead of splitting them. I mean, how are they going to get representation if we just split those communities? And
at least the CSKT and the Blackfeet, now historically they were enemies, but at least they had commonalities. They interacted with each other quite a bit, and so there are similarities to their two hunting areas, their two historical areas, but they have one map. I mean, this map that goes all the way over and catches Billings. This garbage, they're putting the Crow in with the CSKT. CSKT live on Flathead Lake. They're huge on the global warming scam. They're all about environment. And the Crow, God bless them, are trying to make money mining coal. How are those two tribes have any kind of commonality? And they're going to jam them together in this map?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. The Democrats have put their foot on the scale, and it's obvious to anybody that's paying attention what they're doing. Dennison, what's really amazing to me is after November 15th, and we get past this debacle, which I'm quite sure will lead to a lawsuit, because it's unconstitutional. Look at the maps they're probably going to draw for the districts. Oh my gosh, this is just the beginning of a struggle that Montanans need to stay awake and pay attention to, because this is just phase one of a two-phase operation where the Amoeba King is going to design the biggest, worst pie districts in the world. It's like that district you just described and then I described. When you're looking at 10,000 people per district and you look at the math inside those districts, there's 6,000 Democrats and 4,000 Republicans. They totally gerrymandered those seats. And so, yeah, this is a clarion call to everybody to really pay attention. This is coming your way. It's going to affect your politics for the next decade. And if you don't get involved and you don't let them know how you feel, then you have no way to complain for the whole next 10 years.
That's true, Representative Skees. So I guess, it really boils down. I understand that a lot of our, people across the aisle will be like, look, all you're doing is slamming Democrats and this and that. I'm like, you know what? For a moment, just put the shoe in another foot. Okay, just put the shoe in another foot and look at what we're talking about. Forget that we have an R in front of our name. Just look at what we're saying. Do we have any substance to what we're saying? Now, if you don't care, that's a different story. You don't care that you gerrymander. You don't care you're taking advantage of the system. You don't care you're breaking the Constitution. In essence, you're breaking the law. Different story. Then, we have some moral issues to talk about, right? But it's a morality issue from there, right? And a conscience issue from there. But look at your own base. Look at your own party and see, how can you say this is the right thing to do? If we were to do the same thing, you will call us out on it. That's what it boils down to. Rules for thee, but not for me. That doesn't work. And so we want to implore all the public that they have to get involved and do the right thing. Do your research, look at your base, look at what we're talking about, look at what we're supporting, and really make a decision on whether this is right or wrong. Look at our Constitution, look at what's written on there. That's what we're going based off of. We're not going on based on a subjective idea of competitiveness or our own subjective ideas of what is right or wrong. We're going based on what's written in law. Amen. And so, are you going to ignore the law or are you going to abide by the law? Well, which are you? So
yeah, exactly.
With that said, Representative Skees, I guess you basically made a little call to action there, but as you know, the next public hearing is going to be on the 19th. That's our last chance to give public comment on the 9 proposed maps that are currently being in front of the commission right now. After that, on the 21st, they're going to have a work session where they're going to vote on a proposed map. And then after that, on the 30th, we have a chance for public comment on that proposed map. There's going to be a rally in Helena, Montana at the Capitol on the 19th. So you want more information on that, please follow our events. We'll be sharing it on our Facebook. as on behalf of Montana Young Republicans, I don't care if you have an R in front of your name or you have a D in front of your name, you should be getting involved in this process and be looking to do the right thing. I want Montanans have to come together and speak up. It doesn't have to be a Republican versus Democrat deal. What we have is 2 Democrat commissioners that are abusing their power and trying to have a end result, an outcome, a particular outcome. That's what it is. They're the ones who have the power to do that right now. And with this independent commissioner and 2 other Republican commissioners, it's this commission that really has that power, and the Montana people have to step up, have to speak up and say our piece in it. Because if we don't, then we're just letting, again, politicians chosen by respective parties choosing their voters. It should be the other way around. We choose who leads Montana. It shouldn't be politicians choosing who can vote for them. So Representative Skees, I'll give you the last word here. What do you have to say?
No, yeah, well said. And I think we covered it really well. I look forward to seeing everybody Tuesday morning, 9 o'clock on the steps. And you said Republicans, it's not a Republican-Democrat issue. It's a Republican-Democrat issue in that it's a huge independent, Green Party, Libertarian Party issue. If you want a voice in the next 10 years, every single one of you folks should be on the stairs on next Tuesday, because these maps are drawn without even a single consideration for you. So it's like I tell all the young folks whenever I talk to them, if you don't care about politics and you don't think it affects you, it's mapping out your future right now. And how this district is drawn is showing is going to determine what the future of Montana looks like for the next decade. And so please get involved. Thank you.
All right. Well, this is Dennis Rivera with Representative Skees signing off. Please share this video, follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and please tell all your friends to get involved. Thanks again. This is Montana Young Republicans.